My Lords, these two amendments, 23 and 35, give the House the opportunity to discuss the robustness of the science on which the Animal Sentience Bill is allegedly resting. I detect a lack of enthusiasm for the wide-ranging debate on this topic that might otherwise have ensued at a more timely part of the day. So I shall keep my remarks as brief as I can. My Lords, I was once on the Zambezi and had the opportunity to observe the crocodiles. These are largely placid animals who sit basking in the sun, but when hungry can move with terrifying rapidity and can kill you very rapidly indeed. Now, the person I was with who knew about crocodiles said, and I stand corrected by the noble Lord Trees if I've got any of this wrong, of course, that the brain of a crocodile is a very small thing. I mean, the size of a pea was suggested to me, and that it had no capacity within the brain at all, neurologically, for a function that allowed for any memory. So the consoling thought that was offered to me, since a crocodile can't remember anything, was that if it did eat me, it wasn't personal. Now, we're about to enact a bill, or we're close to passing it through our House, without limitation, that, as I understand it, declares a crocodile to be a sentient creature. That is, a creature that can experience pleasure and pain, and science is prayed in aid to support this. And I take the crocodile simply as an example. There are other creatures with brains almost as small as a crocodile, and probably even smaller, which are going to be covered and in scope of this bill. And the difficulty is that they have very limited functions, partly because the size of the brain simply limits the functions that they can actually have. Now, no one doubts, as a matter of science, that a crocodile, as I say, taken as an example, will respond in a certain way if a stimulus, a sufficiently strong stimulus, is applied to it. That is a neurological reaction explicable by the movements of chemicals and electrons through the nervous system and in what passes for the crocodile's brain. But what we're being asked to do here goes way beyond that. How can this be extended scientifically, that is, not by analogy, not by empathy, but scientifically, to include the concept of pain in a crocodile as we understand pain? Because pain is more than a simple neurological reaction. Pain, as we understand it, exists in anticipation. One worries about it coming in one's direction. It exists in reflection. One thinks about it in the past. One has coping strategies for dealing with it, and so on. Most importantly, it exists as a time of abnormality. Pain is abnormal. We want the pain to go away so that we can go back to normal. How can a creature with no memory have any conception of what normality is, let alone what abnormality is? How can it understand pain beyond that neurological reaction in any sense in which we understand it? And yet there are scientists, or people who hold themselves forth as scientists, who say that scientifically that link can be made when it is actually almost incomprehensible for most of us. So who are the scientists in whom the government is placing such faith for the scientific basis of animal sentience which they claim to exist? Where do they gather? Which journals, respectable journals, do they publish in? And so forth. Who is this cadre of leading animal sentience scientists? Of course, there are animal welfare scientists, there are veterinarians, there are people like that, but this is very, very specialized, a very narrow field and a new field, relatively new only over the last 20 years. It has no leading lights at the moment. It is, I would suggest to your Lordship's House, predominantly ideologically driven, and it is based in large measure on funding being supplied by what might be thought of as groups and foundations with a prior view. So my question really to my noble friend is whether, even as he trembles on the brink now, he's very, very close to getting his way. He's very close to seeing this bill through with practically no amendments. But as he trembles on the brink of that success, could I just ask him for a moment, before he commits the nation to this particular bill and this version of animal sentience, whether he shouldn't think twice about whether his claims, for the claims he is making and the confidence he is resting in what is a very, very ropey branch of science, shouldn't lead him just to pull back and consider whether this amendment, which requires peer review of scientific reports from the committee — in fact, it requires peer review of all reports, and I realise now that's a bit silly because some of them will just be procedural, but we can work on the wording. The scientific reports of the committee, couldn't he and I work together so that we had an appropriate amendment at third reading, which would try to make sure that we rested at last on robust science and not on something ropey and partisan? Because if it is ropey and partisan, we will come deeply to regret it.